Welcome everyone, thanks for being here. I spent most of my 30s wearing nothing in particular. I told myself it was minimalism, I told myself it was professional, but today I actually want to talk about what I was actually buying when I bought what I bought and who sold it to me and what it cost me. And what it cost the woman in this ad to lose her audience. Charlie launched in 1973, Revlon, the campaign that made Charlie a phenomenon. The boardroom walk era was anchored by Shelley Hack across the late 1970s. On the marketing record, right, Charlie was the first fragrance launch in which a major mass market advertising apparatus was built around an explicit workplace presence argument. A woman walking into a public space had as much right to smell like herself as the man already in the room. So today we're going to do 4 things. We're going to look at what Charlie was actually arguing in 73. We're going to watch that argument's marketplace collapse across the late 80s and 90s, and we're going to follow the 4 places that the argument went after the collapse. And we're going to name who made the trade, because you, the woman in this audience, you already know that it was a trade. And I think you've been waiting for someone to name it. I bought what they sold me. So did most of you. And that's the room we're in today. It's tempting to read Charlie as a less expensive version of the older luxury fragrances, the drugstore counter expression of what Guerlain and Chanel were doing at an earlier time. But that reading, in my opinion, is wrong. Charlie was making a different argument from these older fragrances, not a cheaper version of the same argument. So if we think about it, we have 3 perfumes and really 3 projects. Shalimar by Guerlain, 1925. Shalimar is an argument for desire. The fragrance asked the wearer to be wantable in the older sense, to be the object of an erotic gaze that was permitted to be slow and romantic, oriental in period vocabulary. Shalimar's argument is that desire is the woman's domain. Chanel No. 5, 1921. This is an argument for modernity. The aldehydic structure was a chemical declaration that the woman that was wearing it had stepped out of the perfumed flower garden tradition right into the 20th century. No. 5's argument is that the modern woman gets to smell like she made the modern. Charlie, Revlon, 1973. This is an argument for autonomy in the public space, specifically in the professional public space. The boardroom, the pantsuit, the open-collared white blouse. Charlie's argument was that a woman walking into a workplace had as much right to smell like herself, to take up olfactory space as the man already in the room. So these are 3 different arguments about 3 different female projects. And each one launched a fragrance shaped to fit the argument. In fact, each one was a structural intervention, not a commercial gimmick. And so holding them in the same column flattens what each one was doing. Charlie didn't stay alone. Across the 8 years that followed, the same register, body present, presence announced, autonomy taken rather than asked for, produced the loudest fragrances of the 20th century. Opium, YSL, 1977. This was desire and autonomy fused, the body refusing to apologize. Think about Giorgio, Beverly Hills, 1981. This was autonomy at full volume, and this fragrance ruled Rodeo Drive. Coco Chanel, 1984. This was autonomy with patrician confidence. Paloma Picasso, 1984. This was the cheaper answer. Aldehydic, lacquered, unbothered. Then there was Poison, Dior, 1985. The register at maximum amplitude, and of course, the famous restaurant bans. By 1987, the apology was already creeping into the corpus. The late decade fruity, floriental launches asked permission for the room the earlier corpus really had taken for granted. And the argument peaked in the 8 years between Opium and Poison. And this is the corpus many of your mothers wore. This is the corpus the comment thread carries. Vintage Poison Hunters, Joanna's 42-year signature, Mad Trackers, Preserved Charlie in the dark cupboard, the woman who chased Fahrenheit-wearing strangers down the street in 91. These fragrances were doing structural work. They were the olfactory soundtrack to second-wave feminism's actual victories. And the autonomy register didn't die because women lost interest in it. It died because the production base stopped existing. So 3 structural shifts coincided across the late 80s and 90s. The consolidation of beauty under the big conglomerates. LVMH formed in 1987. L'Oreal completed its acquisition of Helena Rubinstein in 88. Estee Lauder companies expanded aggressively across the period, acquiring MAC, Bobbi Brown, Avadar, Jo Malone. Alongside the in-house brands it had been building since the 60s. The independent perfume house model, where a single creative director oversaw a single, creative arc, that long arc development of a single aesthetic, that was really absorbed into a portfolio model where individual fragrances were developed against marketing briefs written for quarterly results. And the shift from house-led perfumery to brief-driven product meant that the perfumer stopped being a cultural author. The perfumer started to be a vendor, working from a marketing brief, executing against a target demographic and a price point. And the fragrance completely ceased to be the argument. It became a product wrapped around the marketing brief. And of course there was the narrowing of the palette. IFRA restrictions, while justified on safety grounds, narrowed the materials available to perfumers across the period. Oak moss restrictions, civet restrictions, restrictions on key musks. Many of the materials that had carried the Autonomy register's heaviest beats were removed from the palette or reduced below thresholds where they could do their work. The Autonomy register was the most expensive register to produce. It required heavy materials, complex structures, and the cultural confidence of a perfume house willing to make a fragrance that would be argued about. Under the new conditions, quarterly briefs, narrowed palettes, demographic targeting, the Autonomy register became uneconomical, and it didn't disappear. It migrated. The argument I'm tracing is, of course, specific to the US and Western European market. The Autonomy register held longer where the consolidation happened later or differently. Markets where independent perfumery survived, where IFRA's adoption ran on a different schedule, where the workplace fragrance argument hadn't been won or had been won on different terms. What follows is the migration map of one corner of the world. The rest of the room knows it was in a different one. The first place the Autonomy register went up was the price ladder. Frederick Mull, founded in 2000, by Killian, 2007, Amouage, 1983, but reaching the Western niche markets in around 2000. Serge Lutin, 1992. These houses kept the register alive, but at a price point that excluded the woman who'd bought Charlie at the drugstore counter. This is the most legible migration. It's also a migration that turned autonomy into class privilege. The Carnal Flower, or Portrait of a Lady Wearer in 2026, is wearing a register her mother could buy at the mall in 85 for 1/10 the price. The argument's intact, but the access isn't. Avon, Mary Kay, and the direct sales catalog houses kept trying to produce working woman fragrances through the 80s and 90s. The bottles existed. Avon's late 70s and 80s lines included offerings positioned as career fragrances, but the cultural apparatus that had made Charlie such a phenomenon, the Revlon advertising machine, the Shelly Hack campaign, the cultural moment in which women's workplace presence was a new and contested worth arguing for in mass media event, that apparatus didn't transfer to the catalog houses. The Autonomy register's third destination was the men's and unisex aisle, and CK1 launched in '94 as a unisex fragrance adopted by working women across the 90s as a workplace default. Davidoff from, Cool Water, the men's version from '88, the woman's version from '96 became another working woman's default. The Issey Miyake, Le Dissy, 92, and Aqua de Joao in 95, which is what I wore, extended the pattern. This is for me, the most psychologically interesting migration. The working woman of the 90s denied the autonomy register at her own counter, borrowed it from the men's counter and from the new unisex category, registered or registers that argued for autonomy from an entirely different starting position. She took the borrowed argument because the original had been priced out of access. The clean aquatic register that defined 90s workplace fragrance was, in part, a workaround. And this is the migration that matters the most. Then, across the early 2000s, a new fragrance, category consolidated. It called itself clean, fresh, modern, barely there, you but better. Its anchor launches were Philosophy, Pure Grace, Clean the Brand, Marc Jacobs, Daisy in 2007. And this category was sold to women using the vocabulary of the autonomy register. Independence, modernity, freshness, confidence. She who wears this needs no one else. The advertising of the clean register borrowed every signifier of the Charlie argument. But the fragrance itself registered and, or should I say, argued exactly the opposite of what Charlie had argued. The 1973 Charlie woman walked into the boardroom announcing she was there and that she belonged there. The 2007 Daisy woman walked into the boardroom apologizing for taking up space and was sold the apology as feminism. The clean register is the autonomy register's bad faith heir. It claimed the same vocabulary while inverting the argument. It told women that the highest expression of female agency was not to announce a body. It sold the renunciation of presence as the achievement of presence. It dressed up, don't take up space, in the language of take up space on your own terms. This is the migration that explains the recent comment thread on my last video. This is what a generation of women is reckoning with when they name the beauty standards reckoning. This is what the sex will kill you generation means when they name their cohort. This is why the preserved Charlie sits in the dark cupboard for 40 years. And its keepers knew that the substitute was not equivalent. This is why a 42-year-old refusal to leave Versace reads as a political act. You, my audience, you already knew. And this episode is me saying, you were right. I want to read you 5 things that women in this comment thread of this channel have been writing. And they weren't written for this episode. They were written before this episode existed. In fact, these comments are what prompted me to make this episode. I was 13 in 1986. I had poison and wore it at 13, 14. Then I wore the lighter scents a bit later. I didn't see any contradictions at the time. I occupied the bridge between the two. And as far as the AIDS crisis was concerned, the very year I started dating was the year everyone started telling us sex will kill you. It was a very in-between time to sit in at age 16, 17. Being a teenager in the 90s, I quickly embraced CK1 and light blue in the 2000s. I guess mostly to distance myself from the heavily gendered, opulent, feminine, intense and masculine fragrances of my parents. The fact that I was an awkward, shy girl who struggled with her body not fitting the terrifying beauty standards of the 90s and early 2000s definitely played a part in avoiding attention-grabbing fragrances. In 1981, I found my signature scent for the next 42 years in Gianni Versace for women. I've never thought of those fragrances as loud, but more that they matched me. I'm 5'11" with a statuesque physicality, and nothing I can do will make me petite and small. My perfume should also be big. Perhaps because I'm a child of the 70s, or perhaps because I grew up surrounded by frugal, working-class matriarchs, the smell will always be for me Charlie. I keep bottles of the original in a dark cupboard and pull it out when I want to return to a simpler time. No scratchy Charlie Blue will turn the key either. Contrary to popular opinion, they're not the same. It depends on my mood. Sometimes I want to announce my presence. Sometimes I want to be invisible. I choose accordingly. These women have been writing the argument I'm making today in the common thread of every video I've published, and they've been doing it without a frame because the frame didn't exist. And I didn't invent the frame. I named what you, my audience, had already discovered. The video you're watching today is me saying back to you what you already knew with the dignity of having it said in public, on camera, in the language of cultural causation rather than the language of personal taste. You were right. You've been right for a long time. The apology was the thing. The Autonomy Register is coming back, and you can see it in the launches of the last 5 years. The argument that was traded away in 2002 is being made again in 2026, and it's being made by perfumers and the houses that are old enough to remember what was lost. What we don't get back is the time, the audience that lost her 30s to the apology, and I was one of them. And many of you were as well. You don't get those years back. The apology cost generations of women a register of self-presentations that their mothers had owned and their grandmothers had fought for. You know, we can put on a different bottle next Tuesday. We can't put on 1998 again. And so I guess the point of this episode is not optimism. It is witness. We were sold something that cost us something, and we're entitled to know what we paid.